Joe presents Pioneers, together with Open Money, financial advice for all.
Hello, I'm John Amaechi, and welcome to episode 3 of Pioneers, a new podcast from Joe that aims to get inside the minds of some of Britain's brightest and best entrepreneurs. Each week, we'll interview the men and women who've defined their industry, telling the stories behind the headlines of how they got to the top. My guest this week is Simon Mottram, a man who spent 20 years working in branding, amongst others Chanel and Aston Martin, before founding the unapologetically cool cycling clothing and accessories company Rapha in 2004, that was sold for an equally cool £200 million to a pair of Walmart Airs last summer. Simon, welcome. Take me back to the very beginning of your working career. What were you doing then?
Well, I started my career as a chartered accountant, or training to be a chartered accountant, which is odd to think back now that I did that. My father was an accountant, and I said I'd never do it because I didn't want to do what my dad did. Mm-hmm. And then I found myself getting a degree and going, okay, I want to do something commercial, but I don't know where to start. Maybe I'll give that thing a go. And it was actually a really good grounding, but it was very hard. So I worked at Pricewaterhouse for 4 years, qualified, and then went into brands and marketing and design because that's what I wanted to do.
So you worked for 20 years in that brands and design and more or less, a little bit of accountancy.
Yeah.
So working for somebody else for 20 years, is that what inspired you to want to go out and do something different on your own?
A little bit. I think I always wanted to do it. I think if you grew up in the 1980s, you were all the signals washed over you around being an entrepreneur. You can go and have it. You know, it was the early years of or the peak years of Thatcherism, mm-hmm. good or bad. But what it certainly gave me was a feeling that I should do something for myself. And I was not really sure what it should be. And I think when you're consulting, you're either a career consultant who loves giving advice and never wants to be the principal, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. I never really liked that. I always wanted to be on the other side of the table. And so I was looking for something for quite a long time.
So you say you were looking for something, but was there a plan in there about what that might be, or it was just something?
No, I tried all sorts of business plans. You know, we do that. I'm sure lots of people do that. You sketch out an idea, you write a sentence, you create a document, you may even do a presentation, you might even write a business plan. And they don't always work, and they don't even get past the kitchen table. But there was the one that was always at the back of my mind was something to do with cycling, because mm-hmm. that's what I loved doing most of all.
I mean, I think for a lot of people now that seems like a perfectly natural thing because cycling's profile is so huge. But I imagine then cycling was not necessarily the most obvious of choices, and certainly not high-end apparel in cycling.
No, definitely not. There were very few people riding in London. Mm-hmm. The people who rode in London were seen as being weird. You know, we were either sort of people who couldn't afford cars, or we'd made this sort of weird lifestyle choice, or we were wearing spray-on spandex kind of lycra. And there weren't many people you saw like that. So it was always a very fringe activity and very niche. I used to ride, when I was a consultant, I used to turn up at clients sometimes wearing my mountain bike shoes and carrying a messenger bag back in the 80s. And it was seen as being a very odd thing to do. Now it seems like quite a natural lifestyle choice.
I mean, a lot of people, when they start businesses, it's that gap in the market. For you, is that how Rafa started, or was it something different than that?
No, it was very much that. I would go to my local bike shop, which was not a bad bike shop, but none of them are that good. Mm-hmm. And I'd come out of it thinking, well, I didn't buy anything, and I had a bit of money. You know, I was lucky enough to be earning reasonably well, but I'd come out having not bought anything, and having this terrible experience where nobody seemed to really get the passion for the thing that I felt. And I looked around. I travel a lot around the world, and for my work, and I'd see the same thing happening in most cities. There was nowhere where this thing had been recognised, and where you could see like-minded people who got it and offered you nice products and nice services. And I thought, well, there's a gap in the market, definitely. I might be the only person that is this market, but there's definitely a gap in it for people like me. And I spent a long time trying to figure out, are there more people like me? If so, are there enough? Mm-hmm. And then how do you meet that gap? Yeah, so how do you fill the gap in the market is a challenge.
That passion deficit definitely comes through. And there's a quote that you've got that's brilliant, and where you say that when you started looking around, a nagging frustration became a full-on obsession.
And still is.
Yeah. And still, even now.
And still frustrating.
It's
still massively frustrating.
What part's still frustrating now?
Well, the fact that it's still quite niche. At the moment, blanket TV coverage of the World Cup. I love football. It's a great sport. Well, it's a game, really, isn't it? Whereas cycling, to me, is so much more significant, or at least as significant as football, and yet it doesn't get a look in. It's still somewhat niche. And that frustrates the hell out of me.
So it's significant. Not I'm not a football fan, full disclosure, but it's not significant. It's because not as significant in your mind as it should be. Because is it because of its health factors and the other tangential stuff, or just because in and of itself there's something special and unique about cycling?
Should it be more popular? I think in and of itself there is something special. It's something unique. It's people say, "Oh, I'm a long distance runner," or I love running, and that must be similar to cycling, and it is. Cycling has the same appeal as running, but that's only one facet of what cycling is. So it's like if you add running with 3 or 4 other sports, put them all together, and you get to what cycling really is. Because it's got that social dimension, it's got the cultural dimension, it's adventure and exploration, it's a mode of transport, and it's physically about commitment and reward, and it gives you this mindfulness, and it's got all of those things packaged up in one sport. The challenge is that it's somewhat dangerous, and people think it's very dangerous, probably more than it is, particularly in cities. So it's dangerous. You have to have a bike, you have to know how to cycle, and then you have to kind of break down all these codes of strange language and strange customs, which people like me love, but they're a bit of a barrier for lots of people. Whereas a football, from age 2, you're kicking a tennis
slightly
ball.
Indoctrinated.
You know exactly what it's all about.
Yeah. No, exactly right. So, looking back at your career, you went freelance in 2001. And was that the point you did that because you had an idea, or you did that because you wanted space to look for an idea?
I already had the germ of an idea. I'd started putting together the plans for Rafa. So it wasn't a fully fledged idea, but I definitely needed space to develop it. And that's why I went freelance. And was lucky enough that I could be a consultant, so I could work 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and then spend 2 or 3 days a week building this plan.
Yeah. You said that you sat around your kitchen table for endless nights working up this idea. So paint that picture for us. What was that like?
Well, my experience is probably different to lots of people, because I had 3 children when I started putting the plan together, and my eldest son is disabled. So it was a pretty full-on life at home. And I couldn't just say, you know what, this evening I'm not going to help. I'm going to think about this plan that I've got, this harebrained scheme. So I'd tend to wait till that had all been done. Everyone was asleep, and then I'd work from then, from 10 p.m. or whatever. And because my eldest son, my disabled son, would get up very early, and I'd take over from my wife at 4 or 5 in the morning, that's when I'd start working again, because I could look after him while also writing stuff and exploring things. So it was pretty full on.
A full-on experience with meshing life with your passion.
But it wasn't work, because it was totally stimulating and exciting and rewarding. Just even putting the plan together is rewarding.
So you were given a book of photos by a friend, and tell us about that and what kind of inspiration you got from that.
So a very good friend of mine, who has become a very good cycling friend of mine, gave me a book for my birthday in 1998, I think, and it was called Le Tour de France Intime, so the intimate portrayal of the Tour de France. French book, beautiful photographs, and it covered a period from about the 40s through to about the 70s, late 70s. And there were 2 things that were interesting about this book. The first thing was that all the people it showed, these great heroes of cycle sport, they were rarely on a bike. It was shots of them eating, crashing in a ditch, having a massage, in the bath, lying on a bed, staring out of the window, reading a newspaper on a train, all the stuff that is around the race, but it was the human portrayal. It was about the human beings themselves. It wasn't about looking fast or descending quickly or anything like that. And that made me realise, actually, and that totally resonated with me. And I thought, well, that is actually why I love this sport, because I do it. And when I see the guys doing it as well, and the women doing it as well, it's the connection with the human spirit. And it's a massively challenging sport to do physically and psychologically and emotionally. It tests your spirit more than it tests your body, to be honest. And these photographs showed these guys as amazing heroes. They were just really interesting human beings. I thought, okay, that's my brand needs to capture that. not just make it look cool. It needs to be about the human spirit. And the second thing was that lots of the garments that you could see were incredibly plain and pared back and simple, because that's all you could make in those days. You couldn't sublimation print, so you couldn't have pictures on your jersey, and you couldn't have swirly patterns because that was impossible to produce. So they were incredibly graphically very simple, which was much more appealing and much more felt like the sort of thing you wanted to wear, and it would be much more flattering to wear that. I thought, well, that's what I want to look like, and that's how I want it to feel. So it's a very important book. Fortunately, 10 years into Rapha, I got the chance to buy the English language rights to the book. So Rapha bought the English language rights. We translated the book into English. We published it ourselves. We published many books, and we called it Kings of Pain, which was the name of our first launch exhibition. So that was quite nice, and that's how meaningful that book is.
Yeah, it feels like so the aesthetic is encapsulated by that. The lifestyle elements of your brand are encapsulated with that.
Yeah.
But then there is the messy part of actually raising the funds, the capital to do it. How did you raise that capital? How many meetings did it take to pull together the money to make this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote quite a good business plan. I don't think it was terrible. But it was, as you said before, the context was different then. You didn't see many cyclists out there, and it wasn't a relevant sport. So, and I couldn't find that perfect example of another brand from a different walk of life where I could say, well, I'm going to do Patagonia for cycling, or I'm going to do Nike for cycling. There was nobody who captured what I wanted to do in a different walk of life. So I had to explain the whole thing from scratch. And to be honest, it wasn't until we did it that I think most people got it. So it was quite hard to articulate, and the context was weird for most people. So it took 200 meetings to raise not very much money. I was trying to raise £400,000. I raised 140, of which nearly half was from friends and family. So, I probably wasn't very good at it, to be quite honest. But I think it was also because it was very difficult to get that message across.
It's a concept that was a bit alien for people.
Yeah, it was ahead of the curve. And the first rule of marketing is to be first. And we were definitely first. Nobody had ever done this. And in fact, lots of people advised me not to do it because cyclists don't spend money, because that was the perception. And the cycling market is kind of broken and not very interesting. These are people in the industry, by the way.
So you're being advised by people in the industry
Don't do it.
And by friends, don't do it.
Yeah, pretty
So
much.
how much risk was involved here for you?
It never felt like risk. As I say, I was a consultant, so I knew I could go back and work, and that never concerned me. Having said that, I've got 3 kids and a wife, and I was all in. So yes, it was quite risky, but it never felt like that. It felt like I can make this live, I can bring this to life, and if it takes off, great. If it doesn't, then at least I've learned, and I've given birth to this thing, and I've sort of, solved that nagging doubt that I had.
How much capital did you launch with?
£140,000.
140,000, and that was of how much that you intended to begin?
Less than half of what I intended to raise.
Did that compromise how you launched? Did it?
Yeah, pretty much. And we called it proof of capital. Proof of concept launch, really. It wasn't a sort of fully fledged, although I felt it was fully fledged, let's go for it. But the investors were kind of, let's just try this thing out. And it wasn't very much money. And I sold 75% of the company to get that money. So it was kind of, do what you've got to do to get launched and get over the next hurdle, I think is a lesson.
Yeah, it was clear you had the passion, you had that book that had given you great inspiration, you loved the look of the garment, but you're going into creating garments. How much knowledge did you have of that element of both the design of clothing, the retail of clothing?
As close to zero, I think, as possible, really. I was am a very keen consumer of fashion and clothes and style, and so I was an educated customer. And often, I think it's often the case that these sort of brands come out of a customer thinking they can right or wrong or do things better. Having the naive belief that you think you can get there. And I think knowing I was the customer, which is the most important thing. So I knew what I wanted. And I bought in the skills and found the knowledge to do the rest. But the most important thing is if you know what you want, you know what the customer's going to buy. Not that you know about double stitching or about, seam layouts or utilization of fabrics or manufacturing techniques.
You
can
found
buy that
experts
stuff in.
to fill that, yeah.
Yeah. And you can find those people. If you're obsessed, as I was, and if you're very clear who the customer is, which I was, you can make the rest work.
So you're heading into your launch day, and I think a week before launch, you lost the factory that was supposed to deliver for you. What was that like?
It was terrible. It's probably my worst day in any sort of job that I've had or commercial business world that I've had. We tried to make the first jerseys in the UK, and you can make jerseys in the UK, and there are probably some good factories out there. We didn't find them at the time. We worked with a factory in Nottinghamshire, and we went through about 10 prototypes, and I was pretty exacting because this is going to be our classic jersey. This is going to be our most important launch product, and I needed it to be really brilliant because I'm going to go and wear a garment for 8 hours. It's got to be absolutely fantastic. It's got to work brilliantly, fit brilliantly, look great. So I kept going back with problems, and eventually this guy called me up and said, "I'm not going to deliver your products next week." I asked, "Why?" And he said, "Because I don't think you'll accept them, because I think there are too many faults, there are too many things that you need to get right, and I'm not going to get there." And at this point, I'd booked the launch party and this exhibition space for a month. We'd built the website, we'd primed the press, we'd done everything. And I said, basically, send me those products with no sleeves and I'll still take them. I need products. And he said he wouldn't, which was pretty crushing.
So what happened? What goes through your head? I'm trying to imagine a week before launch. What's going through your head when you're off that call? The moment you're off that call, what happens there?
Well, I walked downstairs to, we were in a room above a shop in Camden Town called Fantasy Fabrics, this shop. It's like a sitcom. You couldn't make it up. We were in a room above there, and I'd gone upstairs above that room to make the phone call. And I walked down. There were 2 people working with me at the time. And I said, "We've got a problem. We've got a week and we're not going to have our main product." So you just instantly switch into safety mode and look for other ways around it. So I went to Paris with 10,000 euros and bought lots of vintage stuff so we could actually fill out the range with stuff that wasn't ours, but it was authentic. We pressed on with the things that we could do, some caps, some T-shirts, some bags, and we started resourcing the jersey as quickly as we could. And in fact, it was quite rapid. It only took us 5 or 6 weeks to get them through a different factory in Eastern Europe. But you just get on. You don't have time to sit and put your head in your hands. You just have to go for it.
And the launch went then as well as can be expected, or was it for you?
Pretty much. We launched, there were a few things I wanted to do. I wanted to hit a certain number of customers of the right kind, people like me, and I wanted to get a couple of pieces of editorial that I thought were really important not before the internet because we were online, but it was before that really became the most compelling medium. So it was magazines in vertical press. And there were a couple of articles, bylines that I wanted to get for Rafa in those magazines, and we got them in the first week. And it felt pretty good, and we had a big party, and suddenly all these people who were cyclists in London came out of the woodwork. They were hidden away somewhere. They were sort of like me. They were just riding through the streets, sort of ignored by everybody, and yet lots of them came to that first event.
They were kind of inspired by your passion, perhaps.
I think that they could see that what I loved was what they loved, I think, and that's all we were saying. We were basically saying, this is the sport of cycling. This is what we do. This is what we love. Come and share it with us. Oh, by the way, there's some products in the corner. But that's still kind of what we do. That's our marketing strategy in a very simplistic way. Yeah.
So in your business plan, there is a name that is like a black hole for media attention in cycling, and that is Lance Armstrong. So that Lance Armstrong, would you use that quote now if you were doing something else?
Probably not. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Without Lance Armstrong, there's no way we would have been able to. Well, we could have launched, we could have existed, but it would have been a damn sight harder. He inspired not just me. I think he inspired hundreds of thousands of people, and he took cycling from being a very niche thing in the US to being something that was suddenly, the Tour de France was on mainstream media.
What do you think it is about him that made that happen?
Oh, also, he's a massively charismatic person. I think he's a winner, and winning matters to the mass media and to fans. And the cancer story was incredible. And the way he raced was, incredible. Is all the words you use now seem incredibly loaded, like incredible, amazing. They all seem to ring true now. But he had all that. It was an amazing story. And he prized open the market for people like us to step into. So, but also he did have a respect for the history, and he understood what it was about cycling, I think, that appealed. Hence, we put a quote from him on the cover of the business.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, loosely paraphrased, not word for word, but he basically said, some people ask me, why do you do this all day, going out and hurting yourself? Where's the pleasure in that? And I said to them, I don't understand pleasure. I don't understand the question. I didn't do it for pleasure. I did it for pain, which was getting to the point that you have to suffer to achieve greatness in the sport of cycling, like in lots of walks of life.
You're watching Pioneers, together with Open Money.
You had this tumultuous start. Was there any point when you thought, I've bitten off more than I can chew with this?
No.
Really?
No, and we didn't. Tumultuous. It was really nice. It was really focused, and it was quite successful from day one. But it took us 3 or 4 years to make a profit, and it wasn't a sort of boom internet sensation, because that wasn't our plan. Our plan was to get to the people who were like-minded customers around the world, and they were kind of under the radar. So it's go really deep in a niche. And we did that. So it wasn't a sort of, slam dunk from day one, but we could see it was every month by month, it was working.
I mean, there's a quote that speaks to that you've given before, that everything to some people, Rafa, is everything to some people and nothing to others. And that seems, even as a business approach, that can seem a little dangerous, because you talked about Patagonia and Nike before, and they, I don't think, are quite so selective amongst the active that they wish to gravitate.
True, although there are times when they have been, and I think you have to have the strength of conviction. You have to stand for something. You have to keep standing for something when it doesn't seem like a good idea. You have to have that. You have to have the ability to do that. But as you grow, you don't want to box yourself just into one very, very tiny corner. So in building the brand, it was really important that we were pretty polarizing. I felt I hate the idea of somebody sitting on a fence about your brand. That means your brand doesn't really mean very much, because you can take it or leave it. I wanted to be a brand that you
either loved
it or you really didn't like it. And I don't like it when people really don't like us, because I kind of understand sometimes, but more often than not, I think we do the right things. But it's a price you have to pay, I think. And I don't want to be purposely controversial, and I don't think we are, actually. I think we just do stuff that we think is right, and it resonates with some people, and other people, for various reasons, think it's pretentious or
elitist is one of the words.
Or elitist, or just not for them.
I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, especially in this context, this political context, elitist is quite a charged word. But what do you think about that charge?
I don't like elitist. I don't like. I'm perfectly happy with exclusive, because I think we'd like to be exclusive to people who are interested in what we have to say. I don't want to appeal to somebody who has no interest at all in riding a bike or getting involved. I'd rather not spend any time looking at them. So I don't mind exclusive, but elitist is unfortunate, and I think it comes mainly from the price. And our prices have always been a little bit higher than, well, they started out being a lot higher than most people. Everybody else has raised their prices to pretty close to ours, but we tend to be in the premium end.
Yep.
And I think that's what most people would take to mean elitist.
You ended up with a 4-year partnership with Team Sky 2013, I think it was. How did that come about?
Surprisingly, really, I suppose. And cycling's still small enough that you can find a way in. I think it'd be quite hard to work with a Formula One team or or Real Madrid if you're just early in your days. I had known Dave Brailsford from before he did the team. When he was first thinking about it, I'd been introduced to him by a woman we work with, who's David Miller's sister. Cycling's a very small sport, so you can get to meet these people. And I'd met Dave and helped a little bit with the thinking for the team. At the time, we were so small because that was 2008 or 9, so we were only 4 or 5 years old. It wasn't even considered that we would be the kit partner. They went with Adidas, but we kept in touch. And as we grew during that period, and they became somewhat frustrated with a bland multi-sport brand being their partner, they wanted somebody who was much more passionate. We started to talk about maybe we should do it. So, but it was a massive step up for us. It was
even there, quite an early stage in the life cycle of your organization, suddenly you have this massive commitment to Team Sky, because there's a ridiculous stat out there, like each rider needs 780 pieces of equipment for each of the years.
Well, need is the wrong word.
Oh, okay.
Each rider was given 780 pieces of equipment, all custom made, by the way.
So
custom fitted.
So none of that is just off the shelf. All of that is measured.
It could have been off the shelf. We decided that if you're going to do this is the sport you love most in the world. You're going to work with the best team, and you're all in. You're completely passionate about it. Why not make the socks custom? Why not make every item of clothing custom? And then as we were doing it, we were thinking, maybe we've bitten off a bit too much here, and this is quite complicated.
I was going to say, there are many entrepreneurs who might think that level of commitment...
It's madness, yeah.
...would be madness just from just pure fiscal perspective.
And to be honest... I had interesting conversations with Dave about this. They're so exacting, Team Sky. They don't want anything to go wrong. So for us to have created so much risk by customizing everything was probably foolish, but it was a great ride, and it was pretty amazing to do. And we learned a hell of a lot. And the first year was very tricky. Second year was much better. The third and fourth years were very successful. So.
I mean, Chris Froome, I heard he is allergic to one of the products that's normally used. Silicon, right?
Silicon in the grippers that you have, and some of the prints that we use.
So what did you...
So you use a different non-silicon gripper, and we had to develop... As we were customizing everything, custom manufacturing everything, of course we could do whatever Chris wanted. And they're looking for marginal gains. So if you're getting a rash or a discomfort, you're going to address it.
So you're going to suffer performance. I mean, so that is just one example of the things that were tricky, perhaps in year one. What else was tricky in year one?
Year one of the Team Sky thing.
Yes, of course.
That relationship. It was just a massive step up. I think just understanding athletes at that level and what they need. We'd done teams before at a domestic level, and traditionally riders would just take what they're given. They would just accept it. At this level, when you're Team Sky and you're absolutely looking for every marginal gain and you are the best athletes in the world, the demands on performance are so much higher. So, everything needs to be lighter, everything needs to breathe better, everything needs to cut through the air better, everything needs to be visible to the rest of the teammates, it needs to look fantastic on TV, the logos need to be in the right... So much of it was just all up a notch.
You almost probably had to stay ahead of the curve on the technology there. How did you...
Yeah.
Was that in partnership with people like Sky, or was it a separate internal process for you?
A little bit separate, a little bit in partnership. You use whatever you can. So we brought in specialists from outside, from other sports. We worked very much with the Team Sky technicians. We worked in wind tunnels. We developed skin suits. You look for any opportunity to add value. We created vests which you could put lots of bottles in when they go and pick the bottles up from the cars. We did all sorts of work on heating filaments in garments so that when you finish at the top of a mountain and you start to get a chill, you can put this jacket on and press the button and heat up, and things like that, which we would never otherwise have done. And it was all exciting and quite stressful. And they won the Tour de France 3 out of the 4 years. So.
Exactly. And I mean, you're a cycling fanatic. So when Chris Froome wearing your kit wins, how does that feel to you?
Pretty amazing. My favourite moment probably of the journey so far was 2013, standing on Mont Ventoux, which is my favourite climb, where I'd most like to ride, with about 100 customers and friends and staff, colleagues at our mobile clubhouse, this big truck we had, waiting for the Tour to come. And round the corner, in the lead, in the yellow jersey, the rest of his kit being Rafa, comes Chris Froome. It's like, wow. Couldn't have imagined that in a million years.
That is remarkable. It really is. So, one of the uncomfortable things that is now associated with cycling so tightly is this doping issue. Was there ever a point when you thought your involvement with that sport might be compromised by the doping scandals and even today the ongoing skepticism?
No, because I think the sport is still incredible and we can't turn our back on it. And I'm still completely infatuated with it. So I never for one moment thought, oh, for shareholder value and reputation, we should step away from the sport. We're all about that sport. I mean, we're all about what we ride, how we ride cycling as a pastime, but that's connected indelibly to the professional sport. So there was never an option or even a thought that we would turn our back on it. Having said that, it's in a pretty bad place, and it does need to improve, and we've been reasonably successful with the sport going through a pretty appalling 15 years. Imagine how it could have been if the sport had been knocking the lights out.
Exactly.
And that's how we look at it. We think, well, what can we do in our little way, because we're only a small company? How can we help to change the sport and make it more appealing and make it more entertaining and make it more valuable so that then we can all rise with that tide? Because we're presumptuous and pretentious and idealists, so we believe we can do that. So when we came out of Team Sky, we spent 18 months doing research into the sport and what's wrong with it from financial point of view, governance, calendar, doping, grassroots, media coverage, all of those things, and looked at it in a number of different ways to see what are the opportunities to improve it. What should we do? What should we as the sport do differently? And we ended up with a thing called the Rapha Roadmap, which we're publishing later this year, which sets out 15 or so pretty important changes that we think the sport needs to make. Some of them we can make, some of them are way out of our hands, but we're going to sort of agitate.
But they're recommendations.
They're recommendations.
Yeah.
And the things, and we are already using that as a filter to decide what do we do next.
So let's talk exit. At the beginning, when you started this venture, did you have an exit in mind?
I don't use the word exit, actually, because I'm still a shareholder. And when we launched, I was a 24% shareholder. So you could say I exited before we launched. If we're going to use the word exit, there's no exit that's happened, really. We have had a change of majority shareholder. That's what's happened. And that was always something which I felt would happen. I mean, that's the life cycle of a business. I wasn't just doing it to have a nice project and bring my dreams to life. It was also to create some wealth so I can look after my family, look after my disabled son. That was absolutely part and parcel of it. So it was always a plan. There was no set time frame. I think it probably took us longer than some people would take, shorter than others.
Did you envision the kind of price that you got for your company?
Not in the first few years, no. No, not at all. No, I thought it could be successful. I didn't think it could be as big as it has become, as quickly as it has become. I now think it can be a lot bigger than it is, because I think we're emboldened now to go further. No, I didn't dream it would be as successful as it has been.
So what did it feel like to you when you came to this? I know you don't call it an exit, because we had a previous guest, Dinesh Damija, who talked about selling his e-bookers site, and he has a remarkable kind of cognitive detachment from it. I suggested that perhaps it would be like his baby. Selling your baby, because it really was engaged emotionally. But for him, it was very practical. He walked away with not even a question. Wow. So for you, what was it? What was it like getting to that point?
It was completely the opposite. It is my baby. I think probably most people who work at Rafa think it's their baby, and it should feel like that. I want everyone to feel completely part of the mission and feel a sense of ownership. I think lots of our customers think it's their baby. Yeah, it's the mark of a brand that really works is when customers feel it's their own.
Yep.
Because it kind of is anyway. So I think we all felt incredibly emotional about this thing and still do. So there's no way I could have just treated a transaction as a sort of detached corporate event. Yeah. I'm not that kind of entrepreneur. This is a mission, and we haven't finished the mission yet, but this is an interesting step on the way. So it's incredibly stressful. And
I bet.
in some ways, it was really brilliant because you get a chance to tell your story and to, tell a number of people who are interested in the business all about Rapha and focus on all the things that are good about it and sort out some of the things that are bad about it and show your best self. And that's an incredibly rewarding thing. But it's also stressful because you want to make sure that whoever ends up being your partner in the business gets it too.
Shares your passion and gets it.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the ownership, how you have customers that feel like they own part of it and your own people do. You have a curious Wednesday morning routine. Well, perhaps not curious for your company, but for many companies. So talk about your Wednesday morning routine and how that might help with your team bonding, if you like.
Yeah. So the whole of the journey, the way I've set up the company is based on all my consulting experience, which tells me that you have to build the brand from the inside out. It's how the culture is internally is critical to how the customer experience ends up being delivered. So your people who work with you are the people you start with. So how we build that culture internally is top of my list of things that I focus on. And from day one, I wanted it to be incredibly passionate about the sport. I wanted people in the company, whoever they were, to feel the same way as I did, to feel the same connection with the customer, to feel the same motivation, to want to inspire other people and to get what it means to be a cyclist. And I always rode a bike during the week because I couldn't ride at weekends because of my son. And I always used to ride on Wednesday mornings. So from day one, part of the Rapha culture was you can ride on Wednesday mornings. It's not a 4.5-day week. You're supposed to make the time up. And most of us do way more than 5 days a week anyway, work. But it means you can sneak out on a Wednesday morning when everyone else is at work and you can do a 4 or 5 hour ride and you can do it properly and you can test product and you can ride with other people, you can ride with customers, you can really re-engage and reconnect with why you're doing it.
So you're still a partner with Rafa. You have just new partners there. Is this your long-term gig? Are you there forever?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't want to do anything else. I mean, I don't want to hang around when I'm not helpful anymore, and that will happen because I'm 52 and, when I'm 72, I'm not sure whether I'll be that much use, but I'm not doing anything else. So, yeah, this is my life's work. So, and it's really not finished at all.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, we've been talking business for about an hour, so we have something that we do with everybody, and I really want to ask you these pop quiz questions inside the Axis Studio style. So just a quick answer off the top of your head. Some of these could be tough for you given your distinct and focused passion here, but we'll see. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Being a musician.
Which business or company, apart from your own, do you wish you'd founded?
I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs, but that's perhaps overreaching. There's a small business in London called Noble Rot, which is a wine business, and I'm passionate about wine, not as much as I am about cycling, but they do a brilliant job. They started with a magazine, then they bought a wine bar, and they are all about wine, and they've delivered it in such a fresh way. I think that's really good.
Excellent. Who is your hero?
My hero is probably Marco Pantani, who most people won't have heard of, he's a tragic hero because he committed suicide with drugs. So, really not a great tale. But he was one of the riders when I was watching TV as a young man who I absolutely worshipped. He was a very fragile but courageous and attacking rider who won the Tour de France and 2 or 3 Giros.
He had a curious nickname, I think.
The Pirate, yeah, Il Pirata.
Pirate.
He was very good at branding himself. So he wore a bandana and had a nose ring and a big hoop earring, and he had a little goatee and a shaved head, and he raced like a pirate. He just took things on. He just did things impulsively. And when he crossed the line to win, which he did very often, he would stretch his arms back behind him and put his head up to the gods, which is not what most people shake their fist.
Yep.
If you're Lance Armstrong, you shake your fist because you've crushed everybody. Whereas for him, it's kind of, I've given myself to this.
Wow.
That's my hero.
What is your favourite word?
Souplesse. Do you know what souplesse means?
No.
It's a nice word. Souplesse, it is onomatopoeic, I suppose. It's a word that we use in cycling for a particular pedalling style where everything is fluid and easy and you pedal these perfect circles in an effortless way. If you have souplesse, everyone looks at you and goes, oh, okay, he's strong and he's a good rider.
Excellent word. What is your least favourite word?
Delay or can't or anything that suggests not being all in or not going for it.
Mm-hmm. Your biggest fault?
Biggest fault is probably doing too many things.
What's your idea? Oh, interesting one. What's your idea of happiness?
Very personally, it would be being 2/3 of the way up Mont Ventoux with friends, being not at the back of the group, doing quite well, smelling the smells that you smell on that mountain, being in this place where so many of my dreams have come to life. In that moment, that's pretty close to perfect happiness.
Gotcha. With all your success, what keeps you awake at night?
Worrying about my team, worrying about people in the business, worrying about us taking too long. That's probably it's all about the next thing, really, for Rafa.
What's your favourite swear word?
I say a lot of swear words. I quite like I quite like bastard.
Bastard,
because
okay.
I'm from the north and I can still say it with a hard A.
That is perfect. If heaven exists, what would you like God to say when you arrive?
That's a really hard one because I'm a very devout atheist. So hard to imagine. It ain't going to happen. What would I like him to say? I don't know. Recognise who I am would probably be a good start.
Okay. Finally, our guest this week, Anne-Marie Hubie, founder of Just Giving, said a question for you, and it was this. If you could do one thing differently, what would it be?
That's a really hard question. Just one thing. I don't know. I don't have many regrets. I don't believe in regrets, and I only have a couple, and they're quite personal, and they're not to do with the business.
For a person, I mean, you've talked about marginal gains. Is there not one thing you could think that you might have improved that would have just made the path a little more simple or smooth?
And this is not because I don't think that there have been problems, because I definitely have. I would have a small thing probably. I'd have got into women's cycling much earlier. I think it was a mistake to be purely a male brand for a while. That's probably the biggest thing I can think of.
All right. That's it for Pioneers. My thanks to Simon Mottram. Don't forget you can download episodes 1 and 2 of the show and all of Joe's audio offerings from your usual podcast providers. Leave us a review if you'd be so kind, and we'll speak to you next week.
You've been watching Pioneers, together with Open Money. Manage it, save it, invest it.